Hi, and welcome to Education Roundtable. This is Larry Petraccaro, and with my co-host Johanna, Wright. And we're lucky tonight to have the Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Thomas Ficarra. And Dr. Ficarra has actually been here once before, so it's a pleasure that he hasn't been intimidated by the television, and doesn't look like the type who would be either. But what we've wanted to do tonight is maybe talk about three topics, and we may or may not get to them, but all of them, but we'll try. And the three topics in general are communication, which is something that I have a strong opinion about being very important. Governance, which is kind of a general topic, and there's a few things here, and that may range from teacher evaluation to facilities to just after-school activities. It could be a lot of things, and how you make the district run well, and how you provide the type of education that we all want for our students. How you set priorities, for example, that's got to be a big one. And the final basic topic is the achievement gap, something that's been in the news for quite a while, not just here in Maplewood, South Orange, but nationwide. So with that, we're going to get started, and we're going to get started with communications, which makes some sense, I suppose. So, Dr. Ficarra, when we talked about communications, at least I like to make a point that communications can be efficient or they can be effective, but that don't necessarily mean the same thing. And they could be different. But what's your take on communications as to the importance of it, the techniques of, so forth?
Well, I've been in school districts for 40 years now, and I have never been to a place that was happy with the level of communication. And I do agree that it's of utmost importance. And what we're trying to do is begin find a point of entry. So one point of entry is board meetings. We're now sending out a newsletter immediately afterwards to principals within our district to make sure they know the new policies that may have been passed at a board meeting, because we found sometimes that there were principals who didn't necessarily realize that the board passed a new policy that they have to implement. So they get that the very next day with a synopsis of what was changed. And then after that, by the end of the week, we have a community newsletter that goes out and to all the constituents, talking about describing the board meeting, the various points of highlights of the board meeting, policies, any new appointments of major significance, and so that's just to make sure that the work that the board does gets out. We've been putting a big push on trying to make sure we can talk about each school each month at least. We have so many good things going on in schools, and I meet people all the time who say, how come no one knows what we're doing, these good things that we are doing? And so we're making a concerted effort to move beyond saying, contact us with what's going on in your school, to making sure that you absolutely have to have a story a month or more about each particular school, so that we get the good things out as well as the day-to-day operation things and the business things. I've been making it a point that on every incident of any kind of significance, that the board gets an immediate communication, and then we communicate to the public. We want to communicate to the public using the school messenger without becoming the latest robocall that people don't look at anymore because it goes out too often. So we have to be careful about using one form of communication too much. And then the other side of communication that I think is very, very important, and that I would appeal to public, particularly parents, there is a chain of command for a reason. So we have 7,200 students. And I have found that when a parent has a problem at a local school, if the response is to email the superintendent's office and the board, that could become unmanageable. Mm-hmm. And so my request to parents is, talk to your teacher. If you don't get an answer, talk to your principal, your vice principal. If you don't get an answer, call the central office and talk to the director or assistant superintendent. And if you've gone through all of that and then you still not getting satisfied with being informed as to the question you have, then call my office, because I want to know, and I will return a call within 24 hours. And so while there's the side of communication where we're obligated to en masse to the public, the most important pieces of communication to a parent are the things that directly affect their children in real time. And if we're not doing that well, then that causes a frustration that just bubbles over in all the glossy newsletters or whatever other means of communication electronic that we want to pursue. If the parents are not getting a direct response to something that they see or they're concerned about, then they're never going to be happy with communication. So that's one of I have a 24-hour rule. Parent calls me, I will get back in touch with them immediately. But I would ask that because there are 7,200 students in this district, that they go through that chain. And if they really can't get an answer, something's wrong, and I really should know about it. So I hope that...
Yeah, and that's really important to protocol and going through that chain, because you can probably get things solved easily within that building, level.
Yeah, no, it does put a range on things. Two questions that come to my mind are, one had to do with the newsletter that goes out. If we're only trying to communicate through the schools, then we're missing probably the larger part of our population who don't have any people in the school. I had kids that went through the school system. I mean, I think I had kids in the system for like 20 years or more, but they're not there anymore. And just because people like me are out of that day-to-day loop, I would imagine most of us still really care.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a challenge, and maybe that's something you've thought about and have addressed or tend to. And the other thing that cropped up that I thought about had to do with what you two were just talking about in terms of the chain of command. That also, I guess, falls into the governance and structure of the organization. But how do you, it's got to be very difficult, because I'm sure every parent who has a problem thinks that's the most important problem the school district has to address. And you just made your point. There's 7,200 kids in the district, and so maybe they'll get an answer. It may not be the answer they want, but I guess it's still an answer. So how do we let people know that perhaps the answer they're going to get, which is the correct answer, isn't the answer they want to hear?
And it's not even so much about getting the answer you want to hear. I have witnessed in certain situations where communications went to a board member and eventually worked its way to me. And when I worked down to the principal, maybe a week elapsed before we realized that the problem was completely solvable at the local level, and the principal didn't know about it. So sometimes you can get there quicker by going through that chain. And to me, it's a double check. If the chain of command is not solving your problem, then I want to know about that. And I just found, I've been doing this a long time, and in districts that are much larger and districts about the same size, that if the chain of command is followed, I really can have the capacity to talk one-on-one with someone who can say to me, I talked to the teacher, I talked to the vice principal, I talked to the principal, I went to the director, and I'm still not getting an answer. And that helps not only them, it helps the whole district and in terms of the functioning. And that brings me to another area of communication. When I arrived here in August, I discovered that the chain of command on the organizational chart did not have a line from the principal to the superintendent. And I think that was a major communication problem. Yes. Where if you feel like you're going over someone's head, if you call the superintendent, then you're not going to do that. And I just couldn't see operating in a district where a principal couldn't call me weekends, nights, anytime they see something on the horizon. Or would I want to be in charge of an organization where I wasn't walking the walk with the principal in a crisis situation or a potential crisis situation? So I think that has helped tremendously. I just got a text over the weekend from a principal who had an idea, and it was a great idea. That was another form of communication that I think will pay big dividends down the road and will definitely connect me to the schools in a way that wasn't possible if the principals were reporting to other people who reported to me.
You know, that makes me think of something I used to say at work when I used to be a product manager, had people working for me. That I always thought it was my job to make myself, what's the right word, not indispensable, but dispensable. I always felt that maybe the best way I could do my job was if I was gone for 6 months and nobody knew. And I think the organization, that structure that you're talking about, moves in that direction I assume, by ultimately empowering decisions to be made at a lower level and problems to be resolved at a lower level. So, from my non-education but business experience, that seems to me it makes a lot of sense. And also gives the parent more credibility by the time they get to you. They've done.
And in my experience with principals is, I've been doing this a long time, and certainly if you don't move from the level you were at 30 years ago, then you didn't learn anything. So I see part of my role as helping principals understand how to be a principal and how to react to things. And I frequently tell principals I have more respect for a principal that calls up and says, I'm not quite sure what to do, than someone who's afraid to expose a potential weakness and then acts in a way that could have been prevented if we spoke about it.
No, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Well, what about the other aspect of communicating with the people in the district who are not being able to be communicated through the schools themselves?
So we've been working on putting together, we have what I call the key communicators list that worked very well for me in a former district, in the Morris School District, where we're trying to get together as often as possible with different pressure groups or interest groups, not pressure groups, interest groups in the community to try to get around and interact with them. I don't quite have an answer for how that 4-second blast that you can get to every parent who's signed up. That's something I'd love to have for the entire district. Parents as well as community members. I'm not quite sure how to do that yet, but we'll be looking into something like that.
Well, I think if that's the case, as long as it's recognized, then they don't expect necessarily exactly what to do now. But the fact that you may see it as an issue, because I see it as an issue, and I think I heard at one time, and I don't know if this is true, that something like 2/3 of the residents of these two towns were people who were housing or families that did not have students in the district. Whether that's the right number or not, I don't know. It may have changed. It may have been wrong when I heard it in the first place. But I think it's laudable because we've talked about this before. I think the school system is probably one of the key elements that can tie a town together. And so the fact that you're looking at it, I think, is wonderful.
No, absolutely. The school is the hub of the community, and it's everyone's school system. It's not just if your children are going there. It's something that everyone contributes to, financially and hopefully emotionally.
Yeah.
And the school system. Let's face it. When people buy a house, they're looking at the school system as well as the house.
Absolutely. And we're going to have to take a break for a minute, so we'll be back in about a minute. If you'll stay with us, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Ficarra.
Every child needs a place
where they can grow up healthy
and learn and be safe. In the Habitat house, my parents helped build. My parents. My mom and daddy. I study. I grow. I learn. I live. Your support can help put a decent roof over the heads of a family like mine.
like mine.
Like mine. To learn how you can help, visit habitat.org.
Welcome back. This is Larry Petraccaro with Johanna Wright. Larry Petraccaro doing most of the talking, unfortunately. But we're here with Dr. Thomas Ficarra, and we've been talking about communications, the importance of communications in the school district and in the system. And before we move on, just, one thing I'd ask you to your opinion at any rate. How important do you think communications is or are to trust in the leadership that we have in the district?
Well, I think that if people believe and feel that they're being told the truth and things are being transparent and they understand what's going on and there's not hidden agendas, I think that brings out the best in everyone. And ideally, the communication should be to a point where it develops a trust in the community, where the community sort of views the school, or make an analogy, as their team. People root for their team and want the best for their team, and that's what the school district should be for the entire community. That this is our system, we're proud of it, we want it to succeed, and that only happens if they believe it's serving their needs and people are not providing their own agendas or hidden agendas in the process.
Okay. Well, let's move on, if we may, to that next broad topic of governance. And one of the questions that I would have, and I think that many people would have, is how we set priorities. Obviously, and this happened. I went to one of the Board of Education roundtables, the one that they had. I think I saw you there before the election. And the question I posed was, everybody who sits at this table is sure that they know the most important issue facing the district. And if you ask everybody at the table, you'll probably get different issues from everyone. But yet you're in a position where you're going to have to, if not choose among them, you're going to have to prioritize. And my question was whether there was a kind of structure or hierarchy, or however you want to call it, that would inform the decisions you have to make. So here we are, a 7,200 student school district, 7,200 individual needs, and you all have to set those priorities for how we're going to administer the resources of the community to that group. So how do you do that?
Well, I started on August 1st, a month before school opened. So the priority at that point in time was to get schools open and make sure that everything was functioning in an appropriate manner. And what's interesting about the summer in school districts is educators in administration and teaching understand this, but often people have a misconception. Oh, gee, what do you do during the summer? There's no one there. I guess you just go on vacation. When this summertime is a time when the entire system gets broken down to be put back together again. And when that process takes place, you're looking at individual student schedules for 2,000 high school students, transportation schedules, repair, cleaning, restoration, painting, putting the entire district back together, hiring. Generally, your greatest turnover is during the summer months. So the reason I bring that up is I walked in August when the system is being taxed to its maximum by being challenged to get schools ready in a month. And that happens in every district. But what that did was give me the availability of seeing just how the central office functioned in relationship to the schools and just how effective we were in things that we dropped the ball on and things that we did well on. And again, everything ranging from delivery of supplies to transportation. It all has to be put back together again. All 7,200 kids move up a grade. Everything changes. And so that gave me a real window on the organization, enabled me to make some recommendations and some changes. And then we followed on that with our preparation for CUSAC, which is a monitoring system put in place by the state of New Jersey. Each district goes through it once every 3 years, and our time is up. They're going to be monitoring us sometime in March, I believe. And with that process, the monitoring system has key components that are called DPRs, and they go from governance to operations to instruction, and to finance. And it is essentially a blueprint by which the state is going to come in and do a deep dive into each one of those areas and provide, and they all have multiple categories under each one. And that's actually another test of the system. And so as we've gone through that, we've set some things that, when we talk about selecting priorities, became a priority that rose right to the top when we went into when we looked at what we had to provide in terms of curriculum and found out that we need to revise 66% of our curriculum in order to be in compliance. That becomes a priority. So the two back-to-back processes, both fairly natural, opening of school followed by digging deep in the CUSAC area, which is the Quality Assurance Act, and the monitoring that monitors everything from your curriculum repositories to your finance, how you're spending your money. Each one of these areas are analyzed and broken down. And from going through that process, it's a very natural process for things to stand out as very good or stand out as in need of a lot of repair and help. So we're in the midst of that process now, and that is putting priorities on the table at a very practical level.
And what are some of those priorities, if you can mention? I mean, before we were talking about the facilities. I mean, is there something that made that, for example, rise to the top? Or
well, the facilities were something that even prior to working with the CUSAC monitoring, all I had to do was walk around the building
And see.
and see. And that was perked my ears up quickly. And the other aspect of the facilities that became very apparent over the summer was the parents coming into the central office, registering their school for the home in the zone that they bought their home in, and finding out they can't go there. And they can't go there because it's crowded. It was overcrowded. And so it was a never-ending stream of parents who were excited about buying a new home or bought a home a year ago or so and registered their children late, and we found out that their schools were overcrowded, and it was not pleasant for them, and it was not pleasant to hear. It was very disappointing. And so there's an overcrowding issue, and then just touring the districts and looking at your portable classrooms in 4 separate sites, they have to go. They have to come down. They're a safety issue. And so these portable classrooms that are going to have to come down and remove, they're 30 years old and plus. They're not even allowed to be built today. Putting money in to repair them, wood floors that are rotten out. It's just not a process that we want to put money into. And so when those portables get removed, we're creating an even larger problem in terms of overcrowding. So the overcrowding coming together with the deteriorating facilities, I've been examining a way of analyzing our needs in terms of capital projects and how we would, within that same concept, provide for a additional space. And as I said in every place I spoke about it, we can't ignore the fact that we have de facto segregation at the elementary school level in terms of facilities, and that in solving the facility problem and the overcrowding problem, we want to make sure we come out with a plan that solves the de facto segregation problem as well.
well, that's a geographic issue, isn't it?
Well, it depends on, we have a couple of weeks or maybe a month or two worth of analysis, but I can say that it doesn't really hold up to put additions on all the schools that are overcrowded. And what we're looking at, and we're not ready to unveil yet because we haven't worked out the details, is some, putting all our eggs in one basket, so to speak, in terms of our construction money, and not in terms of repair, but in terms of building space. I think we're going to be leaning towards making that a configuration somewhere where we can enlarge areas that we can pull from the neighborhood schools and make a larger population somewhere else.
Well, you also may have issues just simply with, if you're going to build, are there a lot of places where there's enough land to build, or is that another
Well, one of the things
constraint?
that the charges that I gave to the architect when we first started this in my first week was that we look at any potential recommendations solely within the land that the school district owns. Because if we have to go and try to have partnerships or condemning areas, you're putting the process out, too many more years. And I believe we can do something by additions in certain areas that we can have a different configuration of the buildings, and there will be some. I'm sure there will be some redistricting involved as well.
Well, when you do that, you're looking at a projected population, I presume. I mean, are you looking out 10 years, 20 years, and how do you decide how to make that judgment, I guess?
Well, this is a very unique situation that we're in South Orange Maplewood community at this time, which is not typical of how you would make a projection.
Okay.
So you would typically make a projection by looking at the live births in the various hospitals that would service this town. And then the demographers make a projection from there. That doesn't work because we don't know who's being born in Brooklyn or New York that's going to move here.
Yeah.
And so the typical profile of the family moving here has been from other towns, typically New York, moving here in large numbers and with children, and so the enrollment's gone up while the births have not necessarily correlated with that. So we're looking at the trends. It seems like it's going to continue as long as the New York market and our proximity, which I doubt is going to change.
Probably not, yeah.
So we're looking at trend lines that show continuing enrollment.
And will you take that out 15 years to say, for example, or do you have thought about
anything more, 10 years is a stretch too. I mean,
Really?
Predictions 10 years out are don't generally hold up.
Okay.
5 to 8 max.
Okay. So I suppose I shouldn't ask you where the stock market's going. That would be nice to know. That's interesting. So you're from that point of view, in terms of the governance of the district, you're being asked to resolve a problem that can't be resolved the traditional way it's been resolved. So you have to be a little more creative in that regard.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's actually, this might be. We just have a little more time. Let me see. Is there anything else I can ask you that you can answer in 30 seconds? Well, I guess I really can't. But Dr. Ficarra, it's been a pleasure to have you here, and Johanna. Yeah, I'm so sorry I talked all the time, but thank you for joining us on Education Roundtable, and we hope that we'll be back again.